Hi everyone, Randy Wilson, Chief Marketing Officer at Conga. Today I'm excited to be joined by Derrick Herbst. Derrick is the Director of Business Transformation here at Conga. Derrick, so today we're going to talk about pricing best practices. Subscription-based business models are garnering a lot of attention, starting with software companies. Are you seeing this trend move beyond software? And if so, where?
Absolutely. We're seeing that move. We're seeing a big transition from the one-time purchase to the subscription purchase across a lot of different industries, well beyond software. A great example for all of us as consumers is entertainment. We see that with Netflix, with Hulu, with SiriusXM, Apple TV, converting all of that into a subscription business. You look at service companies, things like your exercise bike, car sharing, and even my local car wash, for several years now, they've been offering a subscription where you can get unlimited car washes for so much a month or a year. We've seen it in healthcare for primary care. We've seen it in the tech hardware space for PCs as a service, and even in industrials. We see a lot of companies moving in that direction now, where they're selling subscriptions for maintenance and service on the equipment and the products that they sell, Internet of Things services, communication services with the equipment. So yes, it's definitely moved beyond the software space.
Why are companies so interested in subscription-based business models? What do you see as the benefits?
Well, I would kind of put the benefits in three buckets for the businesses. The first is the financial. So it becomes a recurring revenue model. So instead of having these very large transactions, what I would call lumpy revenue, instead of having to say, we got to close 3 deals this quarter, you might have, you closed 10 deals, but you also had 50 other customers that were paying the entire quarter on a subscription. So it definitely levels out the revenue. And it does it kind of keeps you honest, because you can't just sit around and wait for the customer to call back in 5 years to make their next purchase. You got to be making sure you're serving them well the entire time. So it really keeps you on your toes. I'd say the second thing is the volume, the sales volume. It makes the volume of sales on like a monthly or quarterly basis much more predictable in terms of what your revenue is going to be. And it also, I think, tends to drive people to probably buy a little bit more than what they may have otherwise bought. If you tell somebody you have to pay $100 a year for something, or they have, upfront, or you could just pay $10 a month, a lot of people would actually pay $10 a month, even though it's $120. They would think that was a better deal, so to speak, because it's not as big of a lump sum up front. I think the other thing is that when people see that, they tend to buy more. They upgrade a little bit maybe from what they would have if they had to pay for everything up front. And I guess probably the best example of that is the automotive industry. It's not exactly a subscription model, but think about the days when you had to pay for the whole car when you bought the car, right? So, back then, $10,000 car was a pretty nice car, but it was a big deal for someone to go buy a new car. Nowadays, most people focus on what's going to cost me per month. And if you think about that, because they're financing that or they're leasing it on a long-term plan, it reduces their cost per month. So now all of a sudden those electric windows and some of those other nice features don't cost that much in their mind, because it's just an incremental payment. So I think that drives a lot of upsell as well in other subscription businesses. The other thing I think is really important from a company perspective is you get a lot of knowledge about your customer, what the customer wants and what the customer needs. A lot of these models, you can see how they're consuming and using the product or service. So it enables you to tailor your offering a little bit better to what the customers want. And that helps you then also at renewal if you have a better offering in terms of alignment with their wishes and desires. So a lot of benefits for the company. What I'd like to do is also mention, let's flip it around and say, what's in it for the customer? Well, just like it's regular recurring revenue for the company, it's also a predictable cost for the consumer or the other party, right? So they know how much it's going to cost each month or year or quarter for that service. It also gives them a little bit more flexibility. Like I said, they can oftentimes add or delete maybe a part of a service, and there's no additional cost. I mean, there's additional cost, but it's not a big effort, right? So again, when you go buy a car, if you say, gee, I wish I had one with electric windows, well, that's a big issue to add electric windows. When you have a subscription service, maybe turn something on in your service offering. So it gives a lot more flexibility to the customer. And then again, because they're able to see what customers value and what they want, oftentimes the services are a little bit more tailored to what the customers want. So there's a benefit to both sides in it.
What advice do you give companies looking to transition from non-subscription to subscription business models?
Well, I'd say, again, three things. First, you got to think about what the financial impact is and how you run your business, because now you're moving from, again, what I call lumpy sales to pretty even recurring revenue model. So especially if you're making a transition from the one-time purchase to the subscription, that's going to be a change, right? Because you're used to every month or every quarter having some big lump of money come in. Now it's going to be kind of a steady flow, if you will. So that just entails some change in terms of how you think of things financially, as well as how you conduct your business. Because one of the things that's very important here is that your customers can basically, you got to win them every day. They can basically leave at some point, and if you're not taking good care of the customer, they're going to go away. I think that's the other big change from the one-time purchase model, is because you don't have those discrete purchase events. It's an ongoing thing. You have to take care of the customer, because there's not going to be just this chance in 3 years that you're going to rally the troops and have some big event and some special deal, and all of a sudden they're going to love you and they're going to buy the product again. Every single day you have to win the customer. And I think the third thing is that you have to be focused on the fact that your processes, your people, the solutions, the tools for billing and delivery, if they're set up for a one-time purchase, things are going to change, and it's going to be some differences in terms of how you do things on a recurring basis, on a monthly basis. So you have to make sure that you have the capability to handle that, and especially if you're, again, doing a transition from a one-time purchase to a recurring revenue business, there's going to be probably a transition period where you're going to have both of those processes supported by all of your people, your processes, and your technology. So a lot of things to consider. It's a great model, but there is some big differences that you need to take into account when you make that transition.
Derrick, inflation is all over the news. What advice do you have for companies struggling with rising costs in terms of pricing strategies?
Well, it has a huge impact, and I think it's something that we basically haven't had to deal with for about 30 to 40 years in terms of this kind of rate of price inflation for most of the Western world, at least. It's just a big change, and people really need to sit back and think about this. In the past, we had a lot of processes and tools in place, that dealt with it, but with 2 to 3% inflation every year, a lot of people have kind of gotten lax, and a lot of those metrics and tools have dissipated over the years. So I think you got to step back and look at it in kind of the big picture, first of all. If you go back to early 2000, McKinsey did a study of the global 1,200 companies, and they looked at the impact of costs, of volume, and price on the bottom line. And what they found was a 1% increase in your variable costs led to about a 7% impact on the bottom line. A 1% increase in realized price was about 11% increase or impact on the bottom line. So you can see there's a correlation. You gotta use some price to recoup some of those costs. But a lot of people are resistant to raising prices, taking prices out to their customers at a price increase. And so they tend to say, well, let's just sell more volume, right? Well, first of all, most of your competition is probably not going to just willingly give up their volume, so you can achieve that. But more importantly is, from that study, they also found that the impact of increasing volume 1% was only a 3.7% increase to the bottom line. So kind of do the math. If you're giving up 1% of price and you lose 11%, and you got to pick up about 3% then of volume just to offset that, it's not a viable long-term strategy, right? Especially when your competitors are gonna do all they can to protect their turf. So I think the key thing here is to avoid going out into the market with some kind of a peanut butter spread price increase. You need to go out into the market with a price increase that's going to cover costs, because your customers know that costs have gone up. But don't tie those costs explicitly, to your price increase, because that's a double-edged sword. As soon as those costs start to go back down, the customers are going to be right back at you saying, okay, now you need to reduce my price. So I think it's better to go to your customers, acknowledge there's cost increase in the business, and then talk about some of the things that you've done to address those costs in your organization, in your business, in your processes. Highlight the value add that you bring to them that's already included in their price. A lot of times you're providing services and advantages to the customer that over time they just take for granted and they don't realize are there. You can then take that and say, let's work together to find some ways that we can reduce my cost to serve you. So maybe you can take larger shipment quantities, maybe a different packaging option, things like that that are going to save me money so I don't have to pass along some of those increased costs to you.
So on a more tactical level, how should companies go about affecting the needed price increases?
Well, the very first thing you need to do is figure out where you can. You need to understand what your contracts allow. Some contracts do not allow for a price increase, so that's a problem. Some contracts allow a certain amount of increase or a certain frequency of increases. So it's very important to have good visibility into your contractual landscape to understand where you have the opportunity to raise prices and if so, by how much. Which should bring up a thought, hey, if we don't have those kinds of things in our contracts, then all of our new contracts going forward, let's make sure we start putting that in, right? Because if you go back and find that you're limited on everything, then we're in a different world now. That wasn't such a big deal, in the past, in the last 20 years, with 2 or 3% inflation, but now it's a much bigger deal. So you got to make sure that's in your contract. But getting back to today, the other thing is a lot of companies have contracts that already allow for certain price increases. They may be tied to capped at the consumer price index increase level or something like that. So, are you even taking advantage of those already? If not, you should be. And then I think if you do have the opportunity to raise prices, you should not do, again, a peanut butter spread and just say, we're taking everybody up 4.9%. You need to be very granular. Look at the customer's willingness to pay. Look at where you have high value products that you have low margins on. And then look at your strategic versus your non-strategic customers. You really want to make sure you have a solid relationship with the strategic customers. They're your long-term future as you've defined them, basically. So really feel free to be a little bit more opportunistic with the non-strategic accounts when you start to raise prices. Be a little bit more aggressive. I think the key thing to think of going forward, though, is we can do all this math in the background, but you've got to arm the salespeople then with how to justify that price increase. So like I said in the previous question, there's some opportunities to work with your customer, collaborate to help reduce costs and all. But at the end of the day, you've got to enable the salespeople to make a rational justification for why you need this price increase and why it's this amount. I recently heard a Simon Kucher presentation, and they made a really good point. From some of their research, they said, on average, companies only achieve 1/3 of the plan for their price increases. And unfortunately, most didn't plan enough either. So, understand that if you go out with some kind of target number, make sure it's enough, and then make sure that you achieve as much of that as possible, but don't be surprised if you don't achieve all of it.
Derrick, thanks for sharing the insights, and thank you for joining us. We invite you to learn more at conga.com.